From MTN News, you're watching Montana This Morning.
Just ahead, hear how candidates in Montana's hotly contested governor's race say about controlling spiraling numbers of COVID-19 cases. Coming up, Mike Dennison tries to pin the candidates down on specifics in the pandemic fight.
And the Montana Supreme Court says no to an appeal to knock marijuana legalization off the ballot. Why the justices say the measure should stay before voters is also ahead.
6:30 on this Friday. Chair Lehman, Holly Brantley, Matt Elwell, and let us be the first to wish you a Happy New Year because it's kind of January weather out there right
it
now.
Is. You know, that 6:30 time frame, man, it just flew around, hitting the snooze alarm until now.
Yeah.
Yeah, be glad you did. It's cold.
Exactly right.
Temperatures into the single digits for many areas, sub-zero out toward West Yellowstone, and we are bracing ourselves for our second round of winter weather this week. Looks like our best potential of snow coming late in the afternoon into the evening. Now look how this all plays out. This is around 4 or 5 o'clock. Snow begins to filter into the area. Overnight tonight we'll see some banding, some heavy banding of snow. That means some heavier downbursts of snow by the mid part of the day on Saturday. It's still going through the afternoon, although we will get some drier air sneaking in. Today, we're not talking snow, it's just cold early on. Daytime highs should be at or slightly above the freezing mark, but it won't last long. It is a bitter weekend ahead. We'll talk about the raw conditions coming up from the patio coming up in just a few minutes.
All right, thank you, Matt. It is now 6:31 with less than 2 weeks until Election Day. The plan for dealing with continued surge of COVID-19 cases in Montana is still an overriding issue in the statewide campaigns.
That's especially true in the contest for governor. MTN chief political reporter Mike Dennison gives us the latest on what the top candidates are saying and doing when it comes to this pivotal issue.
Earlier this week, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Mike Cooney convened a panel of national health experts to talk about the status of vaccines for COVID-19 and what states should be doing to prepare. He followed that up with a list of his priorities, including leading by example, such as wearing a mask, social distancing, and avoiding large gatherings.
To say just personal responsibility and opening up the floodgates gets us the results we see today. With numbers climbing, with deaths climbing, that's not personal responsibility.
That's a not-so-subtle shot at his Republican opponent, Greg Gianforte, whom Cooney and his campaign have chided for rarely wearing a mask at public gatherings and for suggesting a passive stance on public health mandates. When asked whether he would maintain the governor's current emergency order and mask mandates for many counties, Gianforte has demurred. Instead, he's been saying he'll follow the advice of public health professionals and community leaders without being specific.
If I was your governor, we would be focused on keeping the most vulnerable safe. We'd be relying on personal responsibility, not government mandates.
He's also suggested that earlier shutdowns this spring created what he calls an economic pandemic that Montana needs to recover from. Health experts at Cooney's meeting said vaccines should be available within the next several months, but that it will be important to decide who gets it first and how, and to encourage people to take them. Cooney said if he's elected, he'll start work immediately on a distribution plan for the vaccine and a public information plan. He also said he'll work with hospitals, local health departments, and even the National Guard to ensure Montanans are keeping safe during the winter before a vaccine is available.
Vaccines may not be with us all that quickly. I'm working on a plan right now to make sure that we keep Montanans healthy by doing the things we need to do, getting a vaccine, deploying that vaccine the way it needs to be deployed in Montana.
Gianforte says much the same, but again, hasn't come out with specifics, saying it's too early to know what will be needed come January. January is a ways off, but with Montana reporting record daily highs of new cases and winter approaching, this virus doesn't look like it's on its way out anytime soon. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
The Montana Supreme Court says it will not hear a challenge to a recreational marijuana initiative on the general election ballot. Wrong for Montana, the committee opposing the legalization effort asked the court to invalidate Initiative 190, saying it was an unconstitutional attempt to appropriate state money through a ballot measure. But justices said the group didn't show an appropriate reason for an urgent need for the court to hear the case before it goes through to a lower court. Initiative 190 is one of a pair of legalization measures on the ballot to set up a legal framework for recreational marijuana sales. New Approach Montana, the committee backing marijuana legalization, called the challenge frivolous.
6:34 now. Last night, the final presidential debate, and the polls for the most part are showing Joe Biden leading that race.
But after 2016, can you trust the polls? Our Joe St. George takes us a look at the process and what's changed in the last 4 years.
I don't even look at the polls. I didn't look at them 4 years ago. I don't look at them now.
Perhaps you feel like David Bartlett. When he's out to eat and talking politics, he has no time for anyone that brings up the latest presidential polls.
4 years ago, it was supposed to be a landslide Hillary victory, and what happened?
So is Mr. Bartlett right? Are polls irrelevant, or can you actually trust the polls? To find out,
Patrick Murray,
we interviewed
Lee Miringoff,
two of the nation's most respected and experienced pollsters, Patrick Murray of the Monmouth University Polling Institute and Lee Miringoff from Marist College Poll.
I think there's a lot of benefit.
Miringoff still views polls as a useful tool, revealing which issues matter the most to voters, and also
A source of information beyond just what the candidates and maybe even the media are offering about a race.
for Patrick Murray, polls provide a public service.
Polling gives us a window onto who we are as a people.
But the polling industry knows they have a credibility problem,
Thank you all so much.
with recent critics tracing the issue back to 2016. For instance, in Wisconsin, the day before the election in 2016, Hillary Clinton had a 6.5-point lead in the polls, according to Real Clear Politics polling averages. President Trump would go on to win the state.
The problem that we had in 2016 was not that polling was any more inaccurate than it had been in the past. It was just that the inaccuracies happened to be in one particular direction.
What pollsters now know is then candidate Donald Trump persuaded white voters to break with long-held predictable voting habits and vote for him. Polling samples that once represented the population at large no longer did. Pollsters say they've since adjusted. Some say the polls didn't account for the so-called shy Trump voter, or President Trump supporters who are reluctant to reveal their candidate preference. Our experts disagree.
There you go.
The so-called secret Trump voter doesn't exist in terms of polling.
That brings us back to our original question. Can you trust polls?
So the polls, can be trusted not to sway you necessarily, but to inform.
I think the idea behind averages is a good one because there always is going to be a range of results.
As for David Bartlett, well,
It's going to be what it's going to be.
in Washington, I'm Joe St. George.
6:37 now. A Utah man accused of digging in historic Fort Yellowstone Cemetery while claiming to be searching for the Forrest Fenn treasure, now facing charges from federal grand jury. Roderick Dow Craythorne was indicted last month on charges of excavating or trafficking in archaeological resources after investigators say Craythorne dug in the cemetery within Yellowstone National Park between October 2019 and May of 2020. The Forrest Fenn treasure, by the way, was located in Wyoming in June of this year. There you go.
All right, well, Chet, do you have your holiday shopping done?
Yes. I've got all
I
my
caught
stuff
you off guard
purchased for
there.
4th of July. I have all my 4th of July shopping completely completed.
All right, well, after the break, find out how your shopping experience may change this holiday season.
Interesting. Target making changes to keep shoppers safer as COVID-19 cases increase across the country. We'll tell you what will happen.
But first, here's what's coming up at 7 on CBS This Morning.
Good morning. Ahead on CBS This Morning, President Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden make their final arguments in a more civil debate than last time. Was it enough to change voters' opinions as the candidates return to the campaign trail? Big question there. Also, after decades of feeling ignored by politicians, how black men are now a coveted voting bloc less than 2 weeks before the election. And only on CBS This Morning, Alanis Morissette talks about what inspired her to create an audio memoir and share her personal experiences with others. We'll see you at 7.